Committee manager, really.
I know.
Hey, chair. So I'll be honest.
I was gonna say
All right, welcome everyone to Senate Education, Wednesday, March 15th, 1:51 in the afternoon. We've been asked by the corner office and with timing to move pre-K and miscellaneous education today, which will give us time to work finally on some things related to school safety over the next couple of days. And we have with us, we're honored to have the state librarian with us today. And she is we've had a conversation for the record. Is it pronounced Delneo? Delneo, thank you. Ms. Delneo reached out to me around the section that Senator Hashim has been working on for the state libraries. And Ms. Delneo, we have added some language that you probably have not seen. All right, so let me give you my copy. And what we did was we instead of talking about firearms, what we said was kind of based on the conversation that you and I had, we mentioned adequate public safety protections. And we hope that meets your goals. We also recognize that you are in the thick of this report, which we passed this bill my first year chairing this, I think, a couple years ago. And you're in the thick of this working group on libraries. You're due to give us a report back December?
November 1st.
November 1st. And you are also interested, I believe, in an extension.
That is.
And, you know, people come to the education committee sometimes, affected to teachers for extensions. And so we would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. First, thank you for welcoming me here today. I'm honored to meet you all and really glad to be with you. My name is Catherine Lamb. I'm the state librarian and the commissioner of the Department of Libraries. The adjustments that you've made are absolutely in keeping with the testimony that I prepared today and shared with you. Changing from that specific language to more broad language, I think is going to be very helpful to libraries because we typically, thank goodness, we haven't typically seen firearm violence in our libraries here in Vermont, and nationally that is a pretty rare event. But there are public safety concerns in public libraries that do rise to the attention of the department and the working group. So I think that this new language is perfect.
Let me just pause for a moment. Senator Hashim, are you comfortable with the new language? We reviewed it yesterday, and so what we did was we removed the specificity of firearms and went through and added public safety protections, making certain that libraries have adequate public safety protections. We had heard that the working group is already underway. They're starting to hear some testimony, and this wouldn't limit firearm issues, but it would just keep it more broad. If you're okay with that?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, I think you know, just Catherine, for your just for background knowledge, you know, my suggestion initially regarding firearms, the genesis for that was the librarian down in Brattleboro requested that you know, the second floor of the library is primarily a children's area, and she's had concerns about folks coming into the library with firearms and just the amount of unease that it creates. And so, I mean, if this is broader but still encompasses, then I'm fine with it.
Great.
And I appreciate hearing that. I'll follow up with the librarian, the library director in Brattleboro. I had visited there this summer and she hadn't mentioned that to me, so I definitely would like to hear about that.
That'd be great. If you don't mind closing the loop with Senator Hashim on that, that would be terrific.
Absolutely.
Great. So tell us a little bit about the deadline extension, and then we do want to have a couple of other questions. Really.
Okay, so the working group has been meeting for many months now. The working group started meeting back in September 2021. I did just a quick one-pager that I shared with you all that lists the topics we've covered so far in our meetings. Typically, we have topical meetings with one or two areas covered per meeting. we had planned initially, it's a volunteer type of, some of us have been drafted and some of us are volunteers on this group. And folks had thought that they were signing up for 12 meetings. We're already at 15, and I think we will need to expand considerably. The department has been compensating folks for the 13 in excess of the 12 meetings that were allocated. We do have 5 more meetings already scheduled before November, but you can see that with a meeting schedule this packed, just planning the meetings and lining up people to provide public comment and written comment for the working group is a pretty intensive effort. We've begun drafting some preliminary drafts, kind of recapping what we heard. The Department of Library staff typically are presenting a report at the outset of each topical meeting, and the department staff are assisting with writing the reports on that portion. But then all of the many hours of public testimony that come along with a 5-hour-long meeting need to sort of be summarized and consolidated. So we are feeling a little bit pressured for time. And so my request is for an extension in the report writing to March 1st, 2024. That extension would enable us to do some of the surveys that have sort of been asked for by the working group in-house in the department. We do have one staffing and salary survey that we are working with the state's contracting processes to find a vendor who can do that survey because of its complexity. But our hope is that by doing just a short extension of 4 months, that we would then be in a better position to take our time with the report writing rather than have it coincide with the topical meetings to such an extent.
Does anyone object to pushing up the date?
Just for background, because this is a study which was commissioned obviously prior to our coming into the committee. What was there a kind of a notional timeline that you wanted this study to fit into so that it could be acted upon during the January 2024 session?
Now, you raised a really good question. We will be back in session at that point. And we'll be almost wrapping up session at that point. Do you think you could do it any earlier? Could you? We want it done well.
Yeah.
We'll completely get that. But for example, if we were to do March 1st, 2024, and somebody saw the report and wanted to put a bill in it or needed an appropriation, it's really too late for all intents and purposes. It would have to be more of a late December, early Jan. I mean, the latest we would probably go is like an early January.
Well, at this point, as I shared yesterday on the phone, I'm the type of person who wants to give them a deadline. I don't think I've ever asked for an extension before. So any additional time would be helpful to us. And I think we would like to finish it up as soon as we can. And
Sure.
even with the extension, we would still be trying to hit the November. So I think that late December, maybe a January.
Would it be too cumbersome to do a check-in? Now I think what we do, I think Senator Weeks makes a very good point, and I was not thinking that. I think we need to do around December 20th, and then, of course, if something comes up, if there's an issue, please feel free to reach out to us on our return to the legislature. And if you're able to provide us anything, we don't need to put this in statute, but if we have somebody on this committee who's really committed to that report, I mean, we all are, but we all have different leveling, degrees of interest in things. Maybe we would reach out to you early November, late October, and just say, hey, how's it going? Where do you all think you're at? Is there any preliminary information that you could give us? Thank you very much.
That seems reasonable. We appreciate any additional time. So December 20th. Sounds like.
Well, we appreciate everything you're doing. We really, really do. So in the same case, we are going to move that date so that they have some extra time, December 20th.
The report date.
The report date. Unless they see objections. Okay, great.
sorry, can I ask one more question?
Please.
The current draft has the working group ceasing to exist 1 month after their current reporting date. Do you want me to bump that out as well?
I think that'd be good. Thank you. I know Senator Weeks had a question and Senator Williams.
No, go ahead.
So how, I'm trying to figure, because I'm new at this. How does the library fit under the organizational structure? Who do they follow?
It's a great question.
Is it an education department, agency of education?
It's a great question.
The Department of Libraries is within the Agency of Administration. So our department within state government that's there. Well, part of the thing that's a little bit challenging is that none of the libraries in the state actually report to us. So many people are confused about the relationships between the libraries around the state of different types, public and incorporated public libraries, which could be municipal or incorporated, school libraries, which could be independent or public, academic libraries, again, public or private institutions, and then special libraries. They're all free agents. So we provide an advisory and consultancy service, and we do provide some centralized services like interlibrary loans of databases that everyone can access through their libraries. But there's not a direct line of authority between the department and the libraries of the state, nor is there direct funding from the state to the libraries. There are grants that we administer, but rather usually smaller grants.
As the state librarian, do you have a perspective on the current conversation with Vermont State University's library system?
I've really been trying to learn more information about it. I've been seeing the information unfold in the press just as you all have. They did not come to us for a consultation prior to making their plans. I've requested a written plan that's more detailed, but I've not seen one yet. So
You've requested a written plan?
yes. But I have not received one, and I was told pretty recently that they did not have a written plan besides the FAQs that are publicly available. So it's hard to determine the impact statewide to library services without seeing a written plan, including details about the budget and the potential savings, details about the staffing levels and the service hours, details about which collections they will or won't be retaining, and really the timelines. It's hard to understand how that will impact services statewide. I know that those libraries are currently open to the public. The public can go and browse. And I know that they've been participating in physical interlibrary loan. Those are probably the two biggest concerns from a state perspective of what little we know from the public announcements.
So the one of the biggest concerns is the books. Have you got any ideas about, where we could preserve them? Some of them are very historic.
Yeah, I've not seen a shelf list of their items. And that was one of the things that we did ask for them to provide us with, and we offered to help to facilitate a systematic look at their shelf lists versus the shelf lists of the other institutions. For example, if they had an item in their collection that UVM doesn't have and Middlebury doesn't have, and none of the other institutions have available, a last copy, we would call it, kind of library land, then we would want that book potentially to go somewhere if it was of use to scholars. It's not clear how that would happen. There's time that they would need to do work, but there's also time that the receiving institutions, the ones that were going to house the books, would need for logistics and movement of the items.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a brief one, but I have been as a former librarian, I have been trying to educate folks that leading a collection is a part of the job of a librarian. And I know folks have a knee-jerk reaction to save the books, all of the books. This is not realistic, and you have to lead a collection. And I'm not saying that that's what they're doing, but there's a balance there. And I mean, so I want to defer to a professional librarian on that one.
Yeah, certainly, Senator. It's definitely something that we do to determine the appropriateness item by item of materials in the collection. We usually do that in a thoughtful, it takes some time. We need to look at the circulation. We need to look at, is it on various lists that are relevant to the subject areas. My understanding is that from the latest FAQ that the provost will make those determinations. I don't see mentions of the librarians making the determinations. Typically librarians and faculty, would work together. But I don't know what their internal process is, again, not because seeing it. And the volume of materials too. It's hard to do this type of detailed work in a compressed timeline. To make those determinations, and then for the other institutions to know whether they want those materials or not would also be a challenge.
Agreed.
When my mother died, we found a book, my siblings found a book that I took out of the library. She died in 2009, in 1976. What was the fine? I decided not to just slip it in the overnight box.
Well, sometimes there are stories about this, and I'm really glad to report that in Vermont, many of our libraries have gone fine-free. There are, when I was working in San Francisco Public Library, which was my role prior to coming here, we did an extensive study with support from an organization that worked on social justice matters in the Bay Area, and we determined that there are significant equity issues with fines because a 10-cent fine means nothing to many of us who have more needs, but to somebody who doesn't have any resources, that's a barrier, and that relationship then is damaged for libraries forever.
Yeah.
So I was really thrilled. In San Francisco, it took us quite a long time to make a case and prove what people in Vermont knew already. So when I arrived here on the scene and was talking with everyone as I visited libraries, I learned that many libraries have already gone fine-free and many more are able to do that. And with our nimble bylaws being done locally by local community library boards, they can just make a decision. They don't have to commission a $20,000 study. So it's something that is being addressed here really nicely by public libraries. So it depends where your book is from. But if it's a Vermont library book, usually at that point, they're just happy to get it.
Yeah.
They don't come after you like the Seinfeld episode.
Right. Ms. Delano, thank you very, very much. Unless you have anything else to say, I don't know if you have any advice on either driver's ed or early childhood. Two areas we could also.
I do, not on early childhood
Okay.
specifically, I'll say early childhood education and early childhood literacy. I would respectfully ask that when you think about early childhood literacy, you think about public libraries. Because in the years between when the child emerges and when the child first goes to preschool, we're the only game in town, and sometimes people forget that public libraries provide that service
It's a great
and support
reminder.
communities. Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you so
coming in.
much.
Thanks for coming in person. It really
Oh,
does
you're welcome.
makes a big difference.
I live in town, so I'm always happy to drop by.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So committee, I'm going to ask Ms. St. James if she's willing to join us at the table.
Can I say no? Is that an option?
No.
No.
So
Position.
everybody's a little edgy. That's like, geez. Ms. St. James, while we are on the topic of the libraries and miscellaneous ed, I think the only outstanding section that we have, and I believe I have, do you have an updated copy of miscellaneous ed for everybody?
You should have draft 6.1 on your website and I don't update it.
Yeah, we have it. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. So 8 has 6.1 already in there. And so the library change you're going to make,
Yes.
thank you. You've made a couple of other changes. Would you mind just highlighting those
Yes,
that you
so
have highlighted?
that's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel, and I am more than happy to come to the table anytime you need me. The first change is actually not highlighted. So between draft 5.1 and draft 6.1, draft the section 1 from draft 5.1, which is the state
Oh,
board.
thank you. Thank you.
Do you want to say something about that? Or you want me to?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So I don't, so yes, committee, my apologies. So I pulled section 1. This was the state board piece. It seemed like there were still enough outstanding questions that we would continue on this around the state board and return to that topic and put it in the House Miscellaneous Education Bill. Around how to, there was, in large part, it's thanks to Ms. St. James. There is, a study was done around some of these issues that we were trying to pull apart in section 1. And we need to get our hands on it, and we need to have Ms. Simmons in, and we need to jump into that. And I think that will end up directing more of that work. And it just felt a little rushed, and when the pro tem and others said, it's time, I thought, okay. That's not okay with everybody? I don't want anybody to say,
It sounds really perfect.
great,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay, so your new section 1 in draft 6.1 is what was previously
Yep.
section 2. And I actually, this language isn't highlighted,
It is in my on my
is
copy.
it? There's a little bit of, oh, we did go over this,
Yep.
okay. So the change to the curriculum audit language appears on page 2. And that's to include approved independent schools that are geographically located within the supervisory union or supervisory district selected within the curriculum audit.
Page 6.
Page 2, lines
Sorry.
4 to 6.
Great.
The next change between yesterday and today is, we didn't really walk through it, but I assume you just talked about it, and that is changing the language in the library's working group directive on page 6, line 15. That was, it used the language used to be specific to firearms, and now it asks for the group to look at adequate safety, public safety protections as a more holistic or global term. And then the same change was made on page 8. So page 6 is kind of their duties and what they're supposed to look like, and then page 8 is what should be included in the report. And again, instead of something specific about firearms, down on line 21 on page 8, it's public safety protection. And I will go ahead and change the dates that I caught at the very end of your last witness. Cyber education. So I have not made changes. This is still the pilot program that AOE has suggested for students. The changes between yesterday and today occur on page 11. They're highlighted. So the first one is a suggestion by AOE. It is a rule suspension. So currently there is a State Board of Education rule about driver's education. And one of the requirements in that rule, specifically Rule 2352, is that the behind the wheel instruction can only occur for an hour at a time. And AOE has suggested that for the purposes of this pilot project, that specific part of that specific rule be suspended.
What would happen if that's suspended, if that happens?
If that's suspended, then the behind the wheel instruction could be provided in any increment of time. So the rule says 1 hour at a time behind the wheel. If you lift that, then it would be up to whoever's providing that education to determine how long you can be behind the wheel at a time.
And just so my clarification, it means if I'm teaching, I could take somebody out for 20 minutes instead of an hour.
Yeah, well, you could do that now. It's
can do that
up
now.
to an hour
So
at
you
a
could
time.
do 2 hours or 3 hours.
Got it,
If
okay.
with the rule suspension.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you.
And then the reporting requirement that you all talked about, and I'm happy to take feedback if this does not meet your intent. I'm always happy to take feedback. Line 12, reports. So on or before December 15th, 2023, the Agency of Education shall submit a written report to the House and Senate Committees on Education. Information on the progress made in developing the pilot program created under this section, and the implementation plan for pilot clinics to take place in the summer of 2024. So that's that interim piece that we talked about yesterday. The report shall also include an update on the certification process for driver education teachers, and the steps the agency has taken to address the workforce shortage in driver education. And reporting on the workforce shortage, the agency shall include any recommendations for legislative action. Any comments before we go on to the next piece?
Please, to the next section.
The next reporting requirement.
Still in driver's ed.
Yeah, I know, it's very long. So I would propose that we remove section 5 from the miscellaneous bill in its entirety and essentially keep working it for inclusion in the House miscellaneous education bill. Because I reviewed the notes last night, and I think we're moving in different directions than was actually two different efforts which were desired, and they're cross-pollinated through all the testimony. I just don't think that this is we're solving the problem that we perceive or intending to solve. Just a suggestion.
Yes, please.
I would move that we keep it, but is there a way that we can signal to House Ed, or I'm sure they'll find out that there's a whole other bucket of work that needs to be done along with this pilot program around workforce development, driver's ed workforce development, and I don't want to say training to trainer, but do we have another piece of language for that? Training to.
No, I think that's sort of it. I think
Okay.
trainer.
Yeah.
Trainer.
Okay.
I mean, I'd like to move it at this point. I mean, not right at this moment. We're going to hear a little bit more testimony. We did get a message from our friends in transportation. I think they're pushing for it as well to kind of get this going. But you have my commitment that we can continue as it makes its way through the process. Remember, this will likely go to approach, possibly finance, and now transportation to continue to work on it over the next week to see if we can, and therefore bring an amendment to the floor.
I will say the House is currently working on an educator workforce
Right.
chunk of legislation. I'm not quite sure where it will land. So you may be getting a workforce specific bill or sections.
And it's not unusual, just so people know, that this will be amended many times through the process in the groups, I'm sure, finance, and also by this committee, as you'll see starting next week as bills come forward. So we can continue to take testimony all next week on it and come up with a committee amendment. Okay.
There's one more reporting
Yes.
requirement
Yep.
there, and that's the final report. So on page 12, on or before January 15th, 2025, the Agency of Education shall submit a written report to the House and Senate Committees on Education with the results of the pilot program created under this section. The report shall include data relating to the number of participating school districts and participating students and the use of appropriated funds, and any recommendations for program expansion. If the recommendation is to expand the pilot program beyond the initial participating school districts, the report shall include any modifications and resources necessary for the expansion, as well as a timeline for such changes.
So if you wouldn't mind bringing us a clean copy to vote later today, although we will take a little more testimony on driver's ed today also. My message to them will be, we will continue to work with you today, tomorrow, but we do want to move this so that appropriations and finance has the adequate time to do it.
So my understanding is the only changes I'm making
Is
are
the
to those
date.
dates. Great.
Okay, so let's set that aside for now. Pre-K summer study, you want to share that with us?
Yes. Hot off the press. I don't know if you have, oh, look at that. Wait. Draft 4.1, today's date on it. The additional language or language changes are highlighted in yellow, but there were several changes that involved actually removing language altogether. So I will try and point those out as we walk through the draft. So,
And just so everybody knows how this has transpired, again, for those watching, we've had Senator Gulick has been working between the two committees. We also have the majority of the Health and Welfare Committee on this committee. And we've been just trying, as the committee discussed yesterday, to narrow this down, knowing the time constraints and what, kind of asking ourselves, what are we really trying to get? The reason we're moving this today is because S56 will either be voted out first thing tomorrow morning, if not sooner. So, okay.
you did manage to get this down about a page and a half. So.
Okay, great.
So the first change is on page 1 to the study committee's kind of overall task. And that is the language that's highlighted. So there is created the Pre-Kindergarten Education Study Committee to make recommendations on how to improve and expand accessible, affordable, and high-quality pre-kindergarten education. There is one addition to the membership of the study committee, and that appears on page 2. That is the Executive Director of Building Bright Futures, or designee. Subsection C on page 2, lines 15 through 18, the highlighted language represents, remember we talked about kind of 4 different systems of pre-K delivery. There would be the current mixed delivery system, the public school system, the private pre-kindergarten system, or a system that allows school districts to contract with private providers. And then we get into some of the language that has been struck from previous drafts. So looking on page 3, these are all of the topics and questions that the committee should be looking at. The first category is outcomes and quality. And that language has been narrowed down to what are the benchmarks for high quality in pre-kindergarten education, and how should best practices be implemented and measured across various pre-kindergarten education settings. Those questions were in previous drafts, but they are now the only questions under this section. Capacity and demand. Let's see. Again, almost all of this language was in previous drafts, but there were other questions in this section. So the changes to the language that is here are, I think there was some concern over the language on the workforce requirement on line 14 there. What are the workforce requirements to expand?
Which page?
Page 3, line 14. I think the language previously was, I think it used the term constraints. And so we replaced that with what are the workforce requirements to expand pre-kindergarten education, including whether there is a gap between the total number of licensed teachers, whether there's a gap between the para-educators or the rest of the education workforce. And going on to page 4, what are the educational and training costs associated with training and retaining the workforce necessary? And then under this section heading on page 4, line 3, there's the addition of the question of if pre-kindergarten education in the public school system is provided solely to children 4 years of age, what is the impact on the capacity and workforce of private pre-kindergarten education providers?
Senator Hashim.
Thank you. I remember talking about including geography and geographic equity in part of the study. I couldn't find that anywhere in this draft. Did I just miss something?
You did not miss something.
We took that out.
In order to consolidate, we did remove that section and not opposed to raising the question again, but in order to just get the timeline, to sort of kind of create a task that people felt could be met, we ended up removing it. And in a way, is it not covered in one of the bigger opening questions, or am I wrong? Or broader?
I think we just, can I speak to it?
Please, absolutely.
Senator Hashim, I think we decided to focus more on benchmarks for high quality and best practices versus academic outcomes. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, it does. I was just wondering if I was hallucinating that or something, but
Sure.
no, it's, I mean, if it's something that's taken into consideration in the broader questions that are above, I have no problem. I was just wondering.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, page 4, line 6, the subcategory of special education, there were no changes there. And then page 4, line 13, subdivision 4, the public school expansion subcategory. The first question there, what infrastructure changes on line 14 on page 4, subdivision A? what infrastructure changes are necessary to expand pre-kindergarten education. The first half of that sentence was in your previous drafts, and then everything after it was struck. So the question is just now in general, what infrastructure changes are necessary to expand pre-K education? And then I believe the rest of the language is the same. I should have started by saying anywhere the term full school day, full school year program appeared in this draft has been removed. So other than that deletion, the rest of the public school expansion subsection or subcategory remains the same. And then I'm on page 5 now, section 5, funding and costs. A little bit of wordsmithing on the first question there on line 2. What are fiscally strategic options to sustain and expand universal pre-kindergarten education? And there were a couple other, there were 2 questions prior to that that were removed, and then subdivision B and C and D remain unchanged. Oversight on page 5, line 10, subdivision 6. The language here remains relatively unchanged. It's just adding on line 14 there, capturing the 3rd category or 4th category of a system that allows school districts to contract with private providers. So what support is necessary for AOE to, or what resources are necessary for AOE to provide support and oversight for either a mixed delivery model, a public school system, and then that other category of a system that allows school districts to contract with private providers. And then on line 16, a similar addition to the Agency of Human Services needs to oversee private pre-K, either through a mixed delivery model or just a private pre-kindergarten system. And then a larger addition here on page 5, subsection D, assistance. So this draft still contains language that requires the agencies of education and human services to provide administrative, technical, fiscal, and legal assistance to the committee. But it also contains the following language starting on line 21 on page 5. If the agencies are unable to provide the committee with adequate, moving on to page 6, support to assist with its technical, fiscal, or legal needs, then the agency of education shall retain a contractor with the necessary expertise to assist the committee. Okay. And then on the reporting requirement was originally November 15th. This draft bumps that out to December 1st. The committee shall cease to exist. I'm on page 6, line 14. The committee shall cease to exist on February 1st, 2024. And then on page 7, I've added some specific, excuse me, appropriation numbers.
Water.
No, I'm good. Just wondering what germs I have now. The first appropriation is a sum of $5,000 for per diem and compensation reimbursement expenses. So that would only be for, if we're looking at page 6, line 15, per diem and compensation would only be for committee members who are not otherwise compensated for their attendance. So like their job pays them to be there, or they're not state of Vermont employees. There are 3 folks who are members of the committee. One is a family, a member of a private system, and then there's 2. There's a private pre-K provider and a in-home pre-K provider. So if those folks are not otherwise compensated, they would be entitled to they could be entitled to per diem. This language says they are. Under statute, they are allowed up to $50 a day. And the language as drafted actually limits it to 10 meetings per year. So I just did some quick math and added a little extra for reimbursement in case there was some mileage or anything, and that came out to about $5,000. I'm sure your friends in appropriation will.
Careful, look at
Yep.
that.
And then to cover the contractor, there's an appropriation for $100,000. And then there's a requirement that if those funds, either the per diem funds or the contractor funds are not used, they automatically revert to the general fund. And that is the pre-K study language.
Let me just start by saying, thanks, Senator Gulick. It feels much tighter, much more, I think, doable for folks. Go ahead.
Super quickly, with St. James, I thought that we had talked about on page 3, line 14, in terms of workforce requirements, trying to keep it less restrictive for the committee by having some language in there saying some possible things to consider are whether there is a gap between the total of,
This is line 15.
yeah.
Yeah. So as I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, Senator St. James, that including, does that kind of match? Remember we had this conversation a little bit that the.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Just bring us
Yes.
back to that.
Yes, so, and we can change this a little. There's actually a specific law in Title I about some legislative language.
Such as the word including.
Well, so including, so we don't use, but not limited to. So the term including is kind of naturally all-inclusive, for lack of a better way to put it. The term including but not limited to is encompassed in the term including.
Okay.
But Senator Gulick, are you asking a question? Would you rather have these just considered or not considered at all? Or not
I
considered?
thought the idea was to keep that question really open-ended for the committee to grapple with. What are the workforce requirements?
So you're being more comfortable.
Here are
with
some
it.
things that you could consider.
You might consider
that you
these.
might-
How about what are the workforce requirements to expand pre-kindergarten education? Question mark. The committee may consider.
Yes, is that right?
Totally fine.
Okay. Sorry. I wish we didn't have to make another edit. but-
Oh, that's
No, we're gonna also hear from Mr. Nichols also, and I think, Ms. Cross.
Okay, great. Otherwise, great.
Any other comments or questions at this point? Again, the process for this will really, as long as the majority of us want this attached to S56, it'll be attached to S56. But we'll take a little bit more testimony. We'll take a 5-minute break right now, and then we'll have Mr. Nichols